The dust clung to the hem of her dress as Eliza May Harper stepped off the train with one hand on her belly and the other gripping her daughter's tiny fingers. The station smelled of smoke and cinders, and the horizon stretched wide with a kind of golden silence only the West could offer. Josie, just 3 years old, tottered beside her in scuffed shoes, her rag doll clutched tightly under one arm. The child's eyes were wide, too wide for her age, already seasoned by the long miles and whispered arguments that had traveled with them. Eliza paused, scanning the town that was to be their salvation. Wooden buildings stood crooked and proud, some with signs flaking in the sun, others humming with the sounds of morning commerce. Horses whinnied from a hitching post, and a group of boys kicked at a tin can near the general store. The air tasted dry, like hope left too long in the sun. She pressed her hand to her side, feeling the small flutter of life within. Just a few more weeks, maybe less. The baby hadn't asked to come into a world so uncertain, and she had sworn, that she would do better for this one. Eliza adjusted the bundle hanging from her shoulder, and took a step forward, chin high, heart clutched tight. She had letters in her satchel. Letters from the pastor's wife, kind and warm, promising a place to stay until they found their feet. Her husband, Tom, had come out a month ahead to set things up, land, maybe work. He said the West was where men made their fortune, and families rebuilt. She had believed him then. She still wanted to believe. Even after St. Louis, even after the bruises, the broken things that didn't heal. People changed. Didn't they? Josie tugged at her skirt. Mama, thirsty. We'll find some water soon, love. They walked past the saloon, its doors swinging with laughter that didn't match the day's gentleness. A man stumbled out, half drunk already, and 2 women on the balcony above blew kisses at a passing cowboy. Eliza kept her head down, but not too low. A woman alone with a child already carried enough weight in her glance. The sheriff stood outside his office, puffing on a pipe. He nodded, but didn't speak. She nodded back, wary. The pastor's house was supposed to be near the church. She kept walking, heels clicking faintly, hoping each footstep would bring her closer to welcome. Then she saw him. Tom leaned against the post outside the saloon, shirt wrinkled, vest stained. His hat hung low, shadowing a face she once knew. But the lines were deeper now. Cruel, perhaps. His boots were polished, yet his eyes were bloodshot. Eliza. He spat her name like it burned his tongue. She stopped. Josie's hand tensed in hers. The sun behind him made her squint, but she could see enough. No greeting. No arms open. Just scorn. And something worse, indifference. "Where's the pastor's wife?" she asked, voice steady. "She don't want to help anymore," he said. "Not after I told her the truth about you." The words hit harder than she expected. She clutched Josie close. "What truth?" He laughed, sharp and short. "That you came out here to trap me. That the child ain't even mine. That's a lie." He stepped closer, voice low and mocking. "Maybe. But it's one they believe. And out here, belief's as good as fact." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked around, hoping someone, anyone, might intervene. But no one stepped forward. A few men watched from under the brims of their hats. The sheriff turned his back. "I want nothing to do with you," Tom continued. "You should have stayed in Missouri. But since you didn't, I figure we settle this now." Eliza didn't speak. Her mouth went dry. "I'm selling you," he said flatly. "You and the brat." For a moment, her mind couldn't process the words. They sat there, heavy and absurd. Selling? Like horses? Like tools? She didn't move. He whistled, loud. A few townsfolk gathered like buzzards to fresh meat. The air seemed to shift, thickening around her. Tom pulled out a small crate and placed it by the watering trough. "Step up, Eliza." "I won't." "You don't get a say," he growled, and with a shove to her shoulder, he forced her a step back. Josie yelped. Eliza didn't cry. She didn't scream. She stood frozen, breathing shallow, as her husband barked to the crowd, "She's strong. Can cook, clean, even so. The kid's healthy and she's expecting again. That's 2 more hands coming soon. Who wants him? No one answered at first. A few men muttered. One spat. Another chuckled. A boy whistled low. A barrel-chested man with yellow teeth said, "How much?" Tom smirked. "Let's start the bidding." Eliza felt Josie bury her face against her thigh. The child didn't speak. Maybe she didn't understand, but her silence was too knowing. Eliza lifted her chin. She would not cry in front of these people. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her back remained straight. A man stepped forward. He was tall, with sun-leathered skin and eyes the color of quiet storms. His boots were dusty, his coat plain. No badge. No swagger. Just stillness. "How much to end this farce?" the man asked. Tom looked him over. $100. The man didn't flinch. He opened his coat, reached into a leather pouch, and dropped the coins onto the crate. They clinked like judgment. "She's not a mule," the man said. "Don't ever do this again." Tom sneered but took the money, stuffing it into his pocket. "She's yours then." The man turned and walked away. Didn't offer a hand. Didn't look back. Eliza stood there, stunned. Josie peeked up at her. "Mama!" She blinked and followed the man, step by step, not because she trusted him, but because the auction was over, and she needed to leave before the next cruelty found its way to her. He led them down the lane toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to hills and trees. A simple cabin waited, framed in wood and shadow. He stopped at the porch. "You can have the attic. There's a pump out back. I'll bring bread in the morning." She studied him. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I've seen men like him before. And because I believe you deserve better." Eliza swallowed. "We won't be trouble. I don't expect anything." She nodded once, then stepped into the house, her child in her arms, her soul splintered but not shattered. The attic smelled of cedar and dust, with a small cot and a window facing the hills. That night, she watched the stars from the window while Josie slept beside her, and she thought about what it meant to be bought with dignity, not claimed with cruelty. She didn't know the man's name. Not yet. But she knew his eyes. And in the smallest, trembling part of her soul, something whispered. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning she didn't dare ask for. The morning after the auction, Eliza rose before the sun, her bones aching from a night spent on the narrow attic cot. Josie slept beside her, curled into the crook of her arm like a stray kitten that refused to be unloved. Outside the window, the hills were cloaked in silver mist, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. She listened to it cry again and again, as if daring her to face another day. She lit the small stove in the corner and boiled water from the pump, the cold biting her fingers until they throbbed. The attic had no heat, and the single quilt barely covered the two of them. But she had known worse. At least here, the door didn't slam in rage. At least here, no voices raised in drunken threat. The man had not returned in the night. True to his word, though, he brought bread in the morning. He knocked once and left a wrapped parcel on the bottom step, then walked away without a word. She opened the bundle, coarse rye, still warm, and a small jar of apple jam that made Josie beam with delight. Eliza stood at the attic window later that morning, watching him mend a fence post in silence. His sleeves were rolled and his back was bent to the task. She didn't even know his name. He hadn't offered it and she hadn't asked. There was a quiet rhythm in that respectful distance. Not pity, not possession. Just a man fixing wood in the early light. By the end of the week, the town began to murmur. She felt it first at the mercantile. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Blanchard, if Eliza recalled, smiled thinly and handed her change without meeting her eyes. "Your kind usually doesn't stay long," she murmured. Eliza didn't ask what kind she meant. She knew. Later, when she brought hand-sewn shawls to trade at the general store, 2 young women tittered nearby, whispering behind cupped hands. "That's her," one said. "The one who got sold like a milk cow." Poor child, the other replied. Not hers, though. I heard she came west already expecting. Eliza swallowed the shame. She refused to let it root. She sewed through the afternoons and into the night, fingers raw, eyes stinging. Baby clothes, blankets, aprons, whatever she thought might fetch a coin or two. She patched Josie's shoes and made a second dress from what little fabric she could spare. Every stitch was a declaration: we are not broken. We are not what they say. When spring rains came, she took to baking. Pies mostly, apple and blackberry when she could find them, pumpkin when she couldn't. She traded them for eggs and flour and once, a spool of blue thread that made Josie squeal. But the judgment never faded. It walked behind her like a shadow, whispering that she'd never be clean again. That a woman bought and sold was not fit for Sunday pews or neighborly tea. Still, she remained kind. Always. She helped old Mr. Parnell when his mule got loose and listened patiently to the widow Kelsey's endless stories about her dead cats. She picked wildflowers with Josie and left bundles on porches in the night. And every evening she climbed the attic stairs and closed the door behind her like she was locking the world out. She didn't see the man often, but sometimes, in the dusky calm of day's end, she'd glance out and catch him leaning on his porch rail, watching the trees sway. He never stared, never imposed. But he was there, like the moon, quiet and constant. One afternoon, as she hung laundry behind the house, he approached. Josie was nearby, twirling barefoot in the grass. He held out a book. I found this in town, he said. Figured your little girl might like it. It's got pictures. Eliza took the worn volume with cautious hands. Thank you. She remind me of someone, he added, glancing at Josie. My sister's girl. She died last winter. Fever. Eliza's heart ached in an unfamiliar way. She had grown used to cruelty, to mistrust. But this was different. This was shared sorrow. I'm sorry, she said gently. He nodded. Name's Micah. Eliza, she replied. They stood in silence, the soft creak of laundry flapping overhead. I've seen the way they look at you in town, he said. They did the same to my sister. Different reasons. Same looks. I thought coming west meant a new life, she said quietly. I didn't expect to be punished for surviving. Micah studied her. You ain't being punished. They're just scared of what don't fit tidy. The words wrapped around her like a bomb. I don't need saving, she added. I just need time. Micah tipped his hat. You've got it. He left then, and she stood there holding the book, the sun warming her skin, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a breath that didn't shake. As summer crept in, her belly grew heavy. She wove more, baked more, rested less. Josie, ever bright, began to follow Micah like a duckling when he came by with wood or water. He never turned her away. He showed her how to carve initials into soft pine and let her lead the old mule around the yard. One evening, Eliza caught sight of them from the attic window, Micah walking slow, Josie clinging to his fingers like a child born of trust. Eliza closed her eyes. The baby came early. One late night, beneath a thunderstorm's rage, her water broke. She didn't scream. She bit down on her shawl and braced herself against the attic wall. Josie cried in the corner, afraid. Eliza labored through hours alone, the pain sharp, then dull, then sharp again, until her vision blurred and her breath came ragged. She must have cried out, because suddenly Micah was there, soaked from rain, eyes wild. He didn't ask permission, just helped. Built a fire. Boiled water. Held her hand when the pushing stole her strength. And when the baby finally came, a boy, small and red and breathing strong, Micah wrapped him in flannel and placed him against her chest. You did it, he whispered, almost reverently. Eliza looked down at her son and felt a tear slide free. She hadn't known she still had tears left. Josie crept close, peering wide-eyed. That's your brother, Eliza said, voice barely more than breath. They stayed that way, a tangle of limbs and soft breaths, as the storm passed and morning crept across the hills. Micah didn't speak much after that. He fixed her meals, brought herbs from the widow Kelsey, and carried Josie on his back when she was too sleepy to walk. He never stayed long, never imposed, but she felt the shape of his presence more each day, like the worn path through grass from someone who kept coming back. Eliza returned to sewing when her strength allowed. She stitched with one arm and rocked the cradle with the other. The whispers in town faded, not because they ceased, but because they mattered less. She had learned that judgment was loud only if you let it echo. She gave the baby Micah's last name, not because she owed him, but because it gave the child a piece of the only man who'd looked at her without shame. And one night, as summer bowed to fall, Micah knocked at the attic door with a small bundle in his arms. "I thought he could use a proper cradle blanket," he said. Eliza opened it, soft wool, stitched in blue. She met his gaze. "Thank you for seeing us, not as what we were, but what we could be." He nodded, words caught behind something deeper in his eyes. As he turned to leave, Josie called from her corner, "Good night, Pa." Eliza froze. Micah looked back, startled. Then he smiled. Just a little. And in the stillness that followed, something old inside her began to heal. It would be slow. Pain never left easy. But love, she was beginning to learn, did not need to arrive loud. Sometimes it came in the quiet. And stayed. Autumn settled over the land with amber breath, laying a hush across the hills and painting every tree with strokes of flame. Mornings turned brisk, and the air smelled of damp soil and wood smoke. Life had found its rhythm again. Eliza's days moved with quiet purpose, like the steady ticking of a clock finally repaired. She rose before the sun with her son in her arms and Josie at her feet, hands nimble with needle and thread or flower and firewood. The attic had become home, strange as it was to say, and though the wind crept through the slats and the stairs still groaned beneath her weight, there was something comforting in the constancy of it. Micah visited more often, though never with urgency or presumption. Sometimes he brought eggs, sometimes flour. Once, a small hand-carved horse for the baby, smoothed from pine and smelling faintly of cedar. He rarely spoke more than needed, and when he did, it was with the same simplicity he brought to everything, measured, thoughtful, real. He never asked questions about the past. Never flinched when Josie called her brother Tommy. Never looked at her the way the townsfolk still sometimes did, with curiosity or condemnation. And it was in those small silences, those unspoken permissions, that something tender began to grow. One morning, she found a volume of poetry left by her doorstep, wrapped in brown paper, the name E. Whitman scrawled across the front in bold ink. Inside, the pages were worn soft, corners folded, margins marked with pencil lines. She opened to a page half by chance and read aloud, voice trembling. "We were together. I forget the rest." The words stayed with her all day, trailing behind like the scent of bread cooling on the sill. That evening, she thanked him. He shrugged, voice quiet. "Figured you might like it. It was my mother's." Eliza touched the spine gently. "It's beautiful. Thank you. You sound like her when you read. Gentle. Like the words mean something." Eliza looked at him then, not in passing, not in politeness, but fully. His face was lined with work and weather, eyes shadowed with the kind of grief that didn't beg to be seen. And yet there was warmth there, too, deep and quiet. She saw it in the way he looked at Josie when she laughed, or in how his hands, calloused and rough, handled the baby like glass. Sometimes, she would find the firewood already stacked when she woke, or the shutters mended without her asking. Micah never sought praise. He just did what needed doing, as if kindness was a trade he made with the world, quietly and without receipt. Their moments grew like seeds planted without plan, over shared bread, or when he stayed to help pick apples from the back tree. Once, when Josie caught a fever and moaned through the night, he rode to town without a word and returned before dawn with herbs, cool cloths, and a look in his eyes that said he had once known fear like this before. He stayed until the fever broke. When Josie finally slept, sweat-drenched but breathing easy, Eliza touched Micah's hand. You didn't have to come. I know, he said. But I wanted to. She let her fingers rest on his for a moment longer than necessary. He didn't move. With each passing day, the lines between necessity and affection blurred. He read to Josie while Eliza sewed. She made an extra portion of stew, knowing he'd stop by after dusk. He brought books, history, fables, a worn almanac for her garden dreams in spring. She stitched his shirts when the elbows wore thin. Still, there were no declarations, no vows, just the slow shaping of trust like water smoothing stone. One afternoon, as frost threatened the edges of the windows, Eliza stepped outside to find Micah oiling the hinges on her door. It was squealing something awful, he said, not turning. I didn't mind it. I did. She watched him work, the ease of his movements, the quiet care he poured into something so small. Then, without thinking, she spoke. I used to believe no man could be gentle. He straightened but didn't speak. Then you came along, with your silence and your wood smoke and your worn hands, she said, voice just above a whisper. And I started believing again. He turned then, eyes searching her face. Eliza. She shook her head, not to silence him, but to steady herself. You don't owe me anything. I don't expect anything. I know, he said. That's why it means something. They stood there, wrapped in the scent of autumn, the baby cooing softly from inside, the wind stirring fallen leaves around their feet. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep and the fire had burned down to coals, Micah brought a chair beside hers and sat without asking. He handed her a slip of paper, torn and folded once. She opened it slowly. It was a verse, handwritten in a crooked scrawl. If you are made of broken pieces, then I will gather them gently, and call you whole. She looked up, lips parted. I wrote it, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Wasn't sure if it was any good. Tears welled unbidden. It's perfect, she whispered. He rose slowly and pressed a kiss to the top of her head, not possessive, not rushed. Just a promise, resting on the crown of her hair. After he left, she sat there for a long time, the poem in her lap, heart thudding like a drum left too near the fire. There had been no dramatic confession, no sweeping gesture, just a shared silence, a scribbled poem, a kiss like a prayer. But somehow it was everything, and somewhere deep inside, where hurt had lived too long, something bloomed. Not loudly, just quietly, like love. The first snow arrived during the town's harvest festival, dusting rooftops in soft white and making every breath visible in the amber light of late afternoon. Children chased each other between hay bales, their laughter ringing like silver bells. Men hauled barrels of cider, and women in shawls hung wreaths of dried corn and berries across wooden fences. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and pipe smoke. Everything shimmered with the kind of warmth that comes only when the world begins to settle in for winter. Eliza stood near the church steps, Tommy bundled against her chest and Josie's hand in hers. The girl clutched a paper flag someone had given her, face lit with wonder at the fiddle music rising from the town square. She hadn't planned to come. Crowds still unnerved her, and memories clung stubbornly to the edges of days like these, when she'd once believed in new beginnings, only to be sold like goods at market by the man who vowed to cherish her. But Micah had stopped by that morning with two things, a basket of apples and a soft smile. You should come, he'd said. It's time. She'd hesitated, then nodded. Now, wrapped in her mended coat with her son warm against her, she watched the swirl of townsfolk, those who once muttered behind cupped hands. Many of them glanced her way with nods that carried less judgment than before. Some even offered polite smiles. She wasn't the broken woman who arrived with dirt-streaked shoes and shame weighing down her spine. She had stitched together something of a life. She had survived. And more than that, she had loved again. Not through declarations or grand displays, but through slow, steady acts that healed rather than dazzled. Every time Micah brought her wood or sat quietly beside her while Josie recited her letters, a part of her heart stitched closed. A hush fell over the square as Pastor Greeley raised his hand. "Before we begin the final prayer," he said, "a word of thanks, to the families who fed neighbors, to the hands that mended barns and blankets, to those who gave not just food, but time." He paused. "This town stands not on wealth or pride, but grace. And sometimes grace walks in quietly." Eliza's breath caught. Micah stepped forward from the crowd, boots crunching against frost-covered earth. He wore his best shirt, clean, pressed, with the cuffs she had repaired with navy thread. His eyes met hers, steady and sure. "I have something to say," he called, voice clear over the murmurs. People turned. Even Josie's tiny hand stilled in Eliza's. Micah reached the platform. "A few months ago, I bought a woman and her children at an auction." A ripple moved through the crowd. "I paid for them not because I thought they were mine to own," he said slowly, deliberately, "but because I couldn't let the alternative happen." He looked at Eliza then, full and honest. "She was not a broken thing to rescue. She was whole long before I knew her. And every day since, she's taught me about dignity and quiet courage." A gust of wind tugged at Eliza's shawl. Tommy shifted in her arms. The town had gone utterly still. "She didn't ask for help," Micah continued. "She earned every bit of her place in this town with her hands and her heart. She taught my niece her letters. Baked bread for old Mrs. Thornton when no one else would. Sat with my neighbor's dying wife without ever asking for thanks." He paused, eyes shining. "I want to be the man who walks beside her. Not ahead, not above, beside." Micah turned, descending the steps with sure strides. He approached slowly, gaze never wavering. Eliza's heart thudded. Josie tilted her head, curious. Micah knelt in the snow. "Eliza," he said, voice softer now, "I don't offer salvation. I offer home. Whatever pieces of me are left, I give them to you. Will you marry me?" A hush so profound it could have shattered. Eliza didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, reached out her hand and drew him up to her. Their foreheads met. Her tears froze against her cheeks, and her smile was radiant in its trembling. The square erupted, not with laughter or loud cheers, but with warm, gentle clapping. A quiet reverence. Even the pastor wiped his eyes. Josie tugged at Eliza's coat. "Mama," she whispered, "can he be our forever?" Eliza looked down, then at Micah, whose hand now cupped the baby's back with a gentleness earned through heartache. "Yes," she said. "He already is." Later they danced. No one asked who she was or where she'd come from. They knew. And still, they offered her the space to belong. Micah's arms held her steady as they turned beneath the stars. Her feet moved not from fear or desperation but joy. And when the music slowed and they stood in the glow of lanterns, Eliza leaned close to his ear. "I used to think love had to hurt," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "Not this time." She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, she believed him. So if the world has ever made you feel like a burden to carry, or a story too complicated to love, remember Eliza. She wasn't saved. She was seen. And that made all the difference.